Hello and welcome. This is a brief video regarding culturally and linguistically diverse gifted students. There is a newsletter for Part A of the project to do for class. It has been included on its separate link, I hope. If not, I've included it here just so you can see what it looks like. You might want to print it out and follow along. It doesn't follow it exactly. There should also be a PowerPoint uploaded. If not, I can always email it to you. It's just all the different slides that you'll see throughout the presentation in one so that it's easier to look at. If you have any questions before we start, pause the thing and figure out how to ask me. There are many challenges that students, both gifted and non-gifted, face on a daily basis. Culturally and linguistically diverse gifted students face an even more unique set of challenges. This short video will walk you, as a parent, educator, and student, through the definitions, characteristics, accommodations, you name it, of a gifted student that falls under the umbrella of culturally and linguistically diverse. Although the United States is a melting pot of culture, language, and heritage, the United States Department of Education only mentions cultural diversity once when speaking about giftedness, noting, outstanding talents are present in children and youth from all cultural groups, across all economic strata, and in all areas of human endeavor. Barbara Clark defines culturally diverse students as ones who are being reared in any group that differs significantly in values and attitudes from the dominant culture. The characteristics of culturally and linguistically diverse gifted students are not dissimilar to gifted students not belonging to a special population. Growing Up Gifted by Barbara Clark specifies 4 major cultural groups that are seen in the United States. Of these 4 main groups, each have their own unique characteristics that stem from their cultural values and traditions. Now let's take a look at those 4 groups. These 4 groups consist of African American students, Asian American students, Hispanic American students, and Native American students. Although these groups comprise of over half the public school population, they are underrepresented in gifted programs. Barbara Clark relates this underrepresentation to 3 main ideas: subjectivity, deficit thinking, and prejudice. Along with what Clark feels, the National Association for Gifted Students or Gifted Children also feels that there's this deficit, underrepresentation, and inequity within the gifted programs throughout the education departments in the United States. So they note that in order to meet the needs of these students, a change in how educators view these students must occur. A multidimensional paradigm shift from a deficit to a strength perspective is proposed to ensure the unique abilities of these students are recognized. So they promote or posture 4 dimensions that need to be reworked or looked at, and 4 central ideas. So they're listed here: culturally sensitive identification protocols, early and continuous access to advanced curriculum, essential supports for culturally and linguistically diverse gifted students, and effective home, community, and school support. Clark also notes that many tests used to identify giftedness are, and I quote, culturally loaded. The questions are biased against students of color, yet favor white and more privileged students. An example of this was given in Barbara Clark's book, Growing Up Gifted, where a gifted student who was culturally diverse was given an IQ test, a test to see how gifted she was. In the test, it asked questions and comprehension based off of an article written about kayaking. Now, this student, although she was very intelligent, had never heard of a kayak or had been kayaking before. Thus, her scores didn't qualify her for giftedness. This wasn't because she wasn't gifted. This was because she didn't know what a kayak was. It's these types of questions and articles that are geared toward those in a privileged situation. There are also some blanket assumptions that are often made in regard to gifted students that don't take into account cultural or linguistic diversity. So 3 main assumptions that you'll see up on your screen are that students will seek help when they're struggling academically, and in some cultures, seeking help might not be the way to do it, or suffering in silence, or maybe you talk to your peers before you talk to the teacher. It all just depends on different cultures' attitudes towards education, towards asking for help, towards grades. So it's something that teachers need to be aware of if they have students in their classes that are culturally and linguistically diverse. Number 2 is that students in a special population or in a group are considered experts about that group or population. And that's also not true. Just because they are in a certain cultural group or linguistic group, it doesn't mean that they know everything about that population. That's a crazy assumption. That does happen in schools. So it's something to be aware of. Sometimes you can make reference if you know the student is knows the information that you're talking about, if they are very smart in that one aspect of their culture. But putting them on the spot is inappropriate regardless of what culture or language background they come from. Number 3, some students from certain groups are more likely to be argumentative or non-participatory. There's even some who assume that certain groups are going to have a racial agenda in the classroom. And these kind of assumptions really hinder you as an educator or as a parent or as a student. It really hinders your ability to understand that culture or linguistic background, to really understand that diversity if you're going into these classes with this type of assumption or stereotype, backing it up. Gifted students in these different cultural groups find challenges in their way every day when trying to be identified and taught as gifted. In order for a gifted education to be truly inclusive, changes need to be made in the way these students are taught and tested. For the next little bit, let's pick one characteristic from each of the 4 groups. After that, we'll dive into accommodations for these characteristics. We're going to start with African American gifted students. Clark explains that the African American gifted student is a part of the only cultural group in the United States to have been involuntarily removed from its root culture and then systematically prohibited from continuing or furthering its cultural traditions. This created an environment where large portions of this population align with socioeconomic behaviors rather than a specific inherited culture. Clark notes further that the characteristics that are most observed from African American gifted students often include spirituality, communalism, movement, and exploratory individualism. One accommodation that we as teachers can do to help the gifted African American student achieve their potential is to encourage creativity within them and around the classroom. So for this exercise, they'll be doing something on coherence. So in the beginning of the class, you'll discuss coherence and how it's the logical flow of information in paragraphs, sentences, and essays. And then you'll let them really dive in to this interactive, can be a group activity, can be individual, where they get to be creative with this idea of coherence. So for this activity, you have students get into pairs, or it can just be themselves, and you give each pair either a thumbs up or a thumbs down. So the pairs with the thumbs up will write a coherent story about ordering a sandwich, while those with the thumbs down will write a story that is not coherent and can be about ordering a sandwich. Maybe it's not. Each group will have to defend their stories and prove why they either are coherent or not. They have the freedom to be as creative as they want and are encouraged to read aloud or act out their stories. This gives them the opportunity to be creative and to get excited about something that they can own and explain. And it also really helps them to better understand this idea of coherence. And if they're getting to write down things and defend things, then it really gives them a clearer understanding of what it is. This exercise will allow them to creatively express their understanding of the material of coherence. The next cultural group that we'll explore are the Asian Americans. One challenge that Asian American gifted students face is this expectation of excellence. So since these students are stereotyped as overachievers, as extremely smart and intelligent, identification for them as gifted is very low. So this commonly adopted belief hinders teachers and schools from testing gifted students in this special population because of that stereotype and idea, expectation that they'll achieve excellence. However, as parents and their greater communities support their continued success, the gifted students learn a strong work ethic and develop respect for teachers. Both of these are seen in the classroom and outside the classroom, but they're manifested in the classroom. So for these Asian American gifted students, you as an educator really want to focus and harness their energy into group activities. They've got a strong work ethic that they can share with the rest of the group and that you can definitely see thrive in these teamwork environments. So the accommodation and the activity that I have planned for the Asian American gifted students is as followed. So this activity can actually be pretty confusing if you're not looking at it on the page. So I'm going to try my best to explain it. So for this, you'd pair off everyone in the class with either in groups of 2, 3, 4, depending on how big your class is, and you give a little speech on coherence and what it means. You know, it's a logical flow. You can relate it to making a sandwich. You'd do bread, meat, lettuce, ketchup, bread. You wouldn't want the meat on top. You wouldn't want the sauce on the bottom, like under the bun. It wouldn't make any sense. So after you explain coherence to everybody, maybe you have a couple slides, you get them in their groups, and each group is given a color. So green, yellow, or red, and you explain to them that their color is on the ground and you can follow your colored tape. And on each piece of tape there's going to be a sentence. It's going to start with a topic sentence and then go, alphabetically A through G, A through F, whatever it is. And they'll follow their colored tape on the floor, writing down the sentences that appear alphabetically. So the green group, group 1, this is a perfectly coherent paragraph by the end of the exercise. So after they write down all the sentences, it is perfectly coherent, so it makes sense. So their pathway is a straight line. They'll be very easy to follow and find the next lettered sentence. Now the yellow group, this group of sentences, they're lacking some coherence, so their path is a little less straight than the green. They got to wig and wag and zig and zag through the desks. Now group 3, the red group, this group's path is off the wall, just like a sentence or an essay or a paragraph without coherence. So these sentences are taped to the walls, taped to the ceiling, taped to the desk. Maybe they're taped to your back, so they have to chase you around the room to find out what a certain sentence is supposed to say. And so after they finish with finding all their sentences and writing them down in paragraph order, alphabetically, they will each get the opportunity to read their paragraphs and talk about how it felt on their journey. So things you're looking for are the green group, it was super easy, you understand your paragraph. The yellow group, it was mostly coherent, it was kind of easy, but we still struggled to find some pieces. And then the red group, they're going to be frustrated, and they might be giggling, but they're going to have a hard time even finishing the group exercise. So once they realize, how difficult it is to understand and to follow something that isn't coherent, I think it'll really set in with the whole class what the exercise is all about. But this exercise, you guys will each get a chance to discuss it. What makes a paragraph easy to understand? What made your path easier than the other paths or harder than the other paths? And then you would definitely work together with the group and within their pairs or groups to talk about, how does this look on paper for our paragraphs? And then they would try to write at the end a coherent paragraph about today's class and how it went and the exercise and what they learned, and they'd work in a team and then submit that to you so that you can see whether or not they actually learned anything, if their paragraph reflects what they learned. And it is very beneficial for those who aren't used to being in a group to have to work through, the sentences being all over the walls, or to just go straight through, and then you get a better understanding of how easy it is to read and to write something that's coherent. What you're looking at right now, just so you're not confused, is how you could lay the tape out around the room. This is how I laid it out in my classroom last week. The green is the easy, the yellow is a little more difficult, and the red is off the wall. So this is just a visualization of the activity we just discussed that encourages teamwork and builds, respect between peers and creativity and teamwork within the Asian American Gifted Students program. This next group we're going to explore are the Hispanic American Gifted Students. Traditionally, it has been observed that the Hispanic American household values education, promoting academic success through encouragement and support. As this may be true, the cultural attitudes towards community and family cohesiveness are potentially inhibitory factors on the development of a gifted child's separate identity. Hispanic American gifted students are noted to show maturity and responsibility in the classroom, valuing the oral tradition with emphasis on family and community history. Because of these group values, these gifted students need an opportunity to express themselves independently. They also benefit from a role model from within their culture, as well as peer group activities for learning and visual and kinesthetic learning experiences. In order to engage your Hispanic American gifted student, you need to provide them with some type of cultural root or family root. These are values that they hold very dear to them and that are promoted in their households and in their communities. So for this coherence exercise, we are going to start with a talk on coherence that's very logical, and then we're going to move in and have some of that cultural aspects come into the classroom so that they can really get in touch with this idea. After this discussion on coherence, noting that it is a logical flow of thoughts and ideas in a sentence, paragraph, or essay, the class will read Ellen Ocha's biography on the NASA website. I've attached a link here so that you can see it. She's a super cool Hispanic woman. She's the first Hispanic woman to go into space. The students will then have the opportunity to write about her life in order to work on coherent paragraph structure. So once we all read it together, maybe do a think aloud while you're reading, the students will have the opportunity to write either together in pairs or individually about this woman from their culture. And this is an opportunity to further structure the class and their paragraphs and everything around their culture so that they feel included. There's also an opportunity where instead of having them just simply write a paragraph, you could cut out sentences from a paragraph on slips of paper and shuffle them all up and have different pairs try to make it into a coherent sentence so that it's more of an activity and less writing for them, but it just depends on what kind of class you want to have. The final group that we're going to explore are the Native American gifted students. With a vast and far-spreading group of individuals and tribes that all have their own cultural traditions and values, Native American gifted students are observed to work well in groups, be good mediators within those groups, and value the expressive and oral tradition. These students' gifts often manifest in the visual arts, with their greater understanding of symbols and designs, as well as their personal connections and attitudes towards nature and community guiding their gifted journey. Finding ways to incorporate their traditions into the classroom and curriculum play an important role in their success. One way to incorporate these students into the classroom and really bring their culture into the classroom would be to use the oral tradition within the classroom setting. So instead of just lecturing on coherence, you tell a story, tell a myth, tell a creation that allows them to visualize and use their imaginations and their skills to understand the story better. So for this next part, we have a story that will inevitably be about coherence. All right, for those of you listening and for those of you in class, students, parents, educators, we have just finished our discussion on coherence and how it's a logical flow. Now I want you to imagine that you are walking down a very crowded street, one with people and cars and bicycles, taxis, flashing billboards. You could be in New York City or LA, Chicago, maybe your own hometown is very busy, but it's lunchtime. And you're walking through the streets and you can smell all the delicious smells of the food. Maybe you smell pizza and a hot dog, street foods from the street fair down the road, sandwiches, soups. People are bumping into you because everyone is just as hungry as you are. As you're walking down the road, you can also smell tires, the sewage and the subway seeping from the ground beneath you. You smell body odor as people jog past you and tire grease as bikes speed along. You hear the ding of a bicycle bell, the screech of brakes as a red light turns faster than expected. As you're walking along this busy street and you're smelling these smells and hearing these sounds, you start to think about how hungry you actually are. The smells are starting to make you nauseous with how hungry you are. You think of all the delicious food you're passing, but everything seems so busy, nothing seems worth getting. So you're walking along and all of a sudden the smell of a century strikes your nose. It is the sweetest smell you have ever smelled, and it is the smell of fresh bread from a sandwich shop right down the road. It just so happens that this is your favorite sandwich shop from when you were a little kid. So as you're walking towards the sandwich shop, you can smell the smell. You realize that there's a bit of a line, but that's okay. It's your favorite shop, and you're willing to wait because you know you're going to get the best sandwich in the whole city. As you wait in line, you see people lined up in front of you, all contemplating their order. You note the children who are running around their parents, excited for their delicious sandwich, just like you are. And you just take a minute to smell the warm bread, the cheese, the meats, the lettuces, maybe some sauce. You notice that one little girl's crying because she didn't get a cookie, her mom consoling her. You notice the guy 3 rows back from you who's talking very loudly on the phone about how busy he is. All these things are happening, and you're getting hungrier and hungrier as you get closer and closer to the cashier. Now it's just you and one man. The man in front of you, that is the only thing stopping you from getting your delicious sandwich. So you decide to listen. Maybe he will order a sandwich that you think sounds good. You usually get the same thing, but you're open to try new things, especially since everything smells so good. As you begin to listen in, something catches your ear. This man isn't making much sense, and he's been standing at the cashier for longer than he should have. You hear him ask for silverware, even though he's ordered a sandwich. When the cashier asks, "Oh, would you like white or wheat?" he says he would like ham, not turkey. When the cashier asks, "Sir, would you like it toasted?" he responds with, "Cheese will be fine." He also notes that he doesn't want a drink, but napkins would be helpful, and ketchup is not a requirement for his sandwich. The cashier is visibly flustered and confused. The man still hasn't picked out a bread, has thrown several different side items that he wants, doesn't want a drink, maybe needs silverware, but still hasn't picked out bread. After a couple of minutes, you can see that tensions are starting to get high in the back of the line, and you're hoping the man in front of you will finish his order soon. As you listen to the wonderful cashier behind the desk, he says, "Sir, let me just repeat what you've ordered." The man nodded in agreement, seeing as it's customary for that to happen. And this is where you really begin to understand how confusing this man made it for the cashier. The cashier repeats back, "Sir, you have ordered a small Coke, silverware, ham, ketchup, maybe some cheese, no grapes on the side, you don't like mayonnaise, and you would not like it toasted. But sir, what kind of bread do you want with this sandwich?" After they figure out the specifics and he pays, it's your turn at the cashier. You feel confident because you know what you want. It's what you've always gotten, and you surely didn't want whatever that man had ordered. You step up to the table and you say, "Sir, I would like a ham sandwich on white bread, lightly toasted, no silverware, and a Coca-Cola, please." The man asks, "Would you like a side of chips?" And you say, "I'm sorry, I forgot, but no, sir, I would not like a side of chips." Within seconds, you are pushed on forward to get your sandwich at the end of the counter, paying your $5.15 like it always has been, with your ham sandwich lightly toasted, a Coca-Cola to drink, no silverware, and no side. It was much faster, and you could see that the cashier was absolutely alleviated and relieved to not have to struggle through another complicated order. As you leave the store, you take in one last breath of delicious bread air, and you make your way back onto a very busy street, feeling very satisfied and not as hungry. Friends, it is important to note that when you're telling this story, you need to make it as audio and visual as possible. Students in the Native American culture very much value an oral tradition, and that those values can transfer into the classroom. So maybe you have them express a time that they felt frustrated because something wasn't making sense, and then you help them translate that onto the page when you're talking about coherence. You remind them that coherence is like ordering a sandwich. You want to make sense, you want to be logical, you want bread, meat, bread, cheese, bread, and that is what will make it easier for a teacher to read and for you to understand when you write it. So stories like this, as creative as you want to be, as non-creative as you want to be, can really help students that are from Native American cultures to feel more incorporated, to feel like their culture is really being brought into the classroom. Now that we've seen different cultural groups and linguistic groups, and we've explored some of their characteristics and ways to accommodate those groups. I just want to take a moment now to look back at some resources that we have at our disposal. So I am currently in District 1 in Richland County 1 in South Carolina. So the district that I'm in doesn't actually have that many resources for cultural and linguistic diverse students and their parents and families. I have attached pieces of a newsletter that you saw at the beginning back here at the bottom, just so as like a recap, so you can see the groups and see different types of accommodations and resources. So what I've been using for most of my stuff is either a book by Barbara Clark, Growing Up Gifted, or the National Association for Gifted Children. It has a lot of resources for parents in different languages, and it has a lot of information on gifted students in general. So if you need anything from that, I've included all the works cited at the bottom of the handout as well. So feel free to print that and use that in any way that you see fit. If you have any questions, please feel free to, leave them in the comments, or maybe message me on Canvas for class, for those of you who are in my class right now. And thank you so much for watching this video. I hope you learned a lot.